Hello my friends, my name is Luisa and this is the Lulu Blue Studio. Today we're going to paint another floral composition inspired by original color combinations. We are going to paint some blue peonies with some brown fill-in flowers. I hope that this series with original color combination is going to inspire your next compositions. Let's start. I approach this floral composition creating first the flowers. I'm using a new brush which I bought recently and I really like. This is a filbert brush from the brand Pro Arte and I will leave all the details in the description below. And with this filbert brush I take a mixture mainly of cobalt blue and I start to create the center of these peonies. In particular, I start from the first peony and I mix also a little bit of Davis Gray that I have on a travel palette. And I mix these two colors and I remember to change the color values by removing part of the pigment in my cup of water. In this way, I start creating the first and central petals with a darker blue color. And then removing part of the pigment in the cup of water, I mainly use water and lighter values of this mixture of blue and gray to create the other petals of this peony. When the center part of the peony is still wet, I start to add with this brush, with the filbert brush, but then I change into a smaller brush, a round brush in size 6, the center part of this flower. I just touch very lightly the paper with the tip of this brush, creating a few dots and some longer brush strokes that start from the center of the flower and go down to the middle of the flower. When I'm quite satisfied with the shape of the first flower, I proceed creating the second flower and I use a mixture of phthalo blue. The phthalo blue color is a little bit darker compared to the cobalt blue and I like to have these flowers in a slightly different color hues. Therefore, I proceed with these second flowers being a little bit darker. I keep in mind to create the first petals in a darker color and then I remove part of the pigment in the cup of water and I add brush strokes with lighter values of this mixture of phthalo blue, where I added also a little bit of Davis Gray. I really like to create petals of flowers like these, peonies, with a filbert brush because I think that the shape of the brush is already very similar to the shape of the petals of peonies in nature. I proceed creating the third peony by using a little bit of Prussian blue. This is the third blue that I have in my color palette, and using different color values of these three blues that I have in my color palette, I've decided to create the center part of this floral bouquet. I'm using the same technique as for the first two flowers, where I'm creating the first petal very dark in color value, and then removing part of the pigment in my cup of water, I add additional petals all around, creating this beautiful shape, round shape of the third peony in this composition. The idea for this composition is to have all the main flowers centered in the central part of the paper and then adding fill-in flowers left and right that are sort of framing these blue center flowers, and therefore I am still creating this sort of round shape with all of these peonies with different color values and color hues of blues. I add some yellow in the center of these peonies. This is yellow ochre, and I like this yellow to blend a little bit with the blue that is still wet, and therefore I use a round brush in size 6 and I add these yellow brush strokes when the blue is still wet. If you don't want the yellow to completely blend with the blue, you can wait for the blue to completely be dried, and then you can add your yellow brush strokes that are going to be more precise and defined. With this round brush in size 6, I also took a little bit of green and I started to create the stems of these flowers. In order to give movement to this whole composition, these stems are not completely straight, but I create with my wrist a sort of C shape. The green I'm using is a mixture of sap green and green earth. I start with this light mixture and with different color values to create also the leaves that I place mainly between these blue flowers. Using such a small brush, a round brush in size 6, I'm creating in first place these leaves that are quite small in size, and I really like in first place because I want these blue flowers to actually pop from the whole page and to be, let's say, the protagonist of this whole composition. So I don't want to have leaves that are too big in size. This is the first approach. Then, when I like how I have placed the first layer of leaves, I take a bigger brush, this is a round brush in size 12, and mixing a little bit of azomethyl green yellow and a little bit of cobalt green, this is a darker sort of green, I started to create a few bigger leaves. I keep in mind always to change the color value. That means that once I've mixed my greens, I rinse into the cup of water a little bit of pigment, and using basically less pigment, I keep laying on the page additional leaves that are much lighter in color value. And I keep adding these leaves around the blue flowers, like the leaves are framing these blue flowers. Then I take my filbert brush, the one that I've used to create the peonies, and using mainly the side of this filbert brush, I started to create some filling flowers in brown color. I mix mainly burnt umber and some yellow ochre, and these filling flowers are longer in shape and are sort of framing our blue flowers. While I was painting for fun at home one day, I paint a similar composition to the one of this tutorial, where I created blue flowers and some brown filling flowers. I really love this floral composition that I created, that I've decided to create this tutorial for you all. I really think that brown is a color that we don't, or at least I don't usually use often in my compositions, but I really think that it's a warm color that can allow the flowers to pop. And I've decided to create this tutorial for you, hoping that it can help you to imagine color combinations that are not the usual ones, also using colors that are not often used for floral compositions. And so at this point I proceed creating this sort of wheat stems in brown color, and I keep using the side of my brush, this filbert brush, and I keep in mind to change the color value and the mixture a little bit of this brown to create some variety in these stems. Using then a smaller brush and adding to the mixture a little bit of Mars Black, I use the tip of this fine brush to create the center part of these stems, and also to add a few brush strokes that are small but also darker in color. as I am adding brown stems, I keep using the same method I've used for the flowers, and so these stems are not exactly straight line, but I try to give them a little bit of shape, a round shape, and these stems have a little bit of a C shape at the bottom. I keep my wrist very light, and these very light and soft touches of brown onto the paper give the impression that these are fine stems of these widths. I like how this floral composition is taking shape so far. I've decided to use a similar technique of creating, let's say, yellow widths at this point with the filbert brush, just to create a little bit of connection between the center part of these blue peonies, which is yellow, and the outer part of this composition, where at the moment has only some brown width. So I've decided to add some yellow touches to reconnect, let's say, to the center part of the peonies. I'm using a similar technique of using basically the side of this filbert brush, and I am changing the color values and a little bit of the color hue, mixing some lemon yellow and yellow ochre from the brand Schminke. With the round brush in size 6, I use a little bit of pressure to create the center part of these yellow widths. I look at the whole composition and I really like how these yellow widths and brown widths are actually framing these blue flowers. I really like how this color combination of blue and brown with a little bit of yellow is popping from the white page. So I just define and I just add the yellow center of the third peony. And then I decide to add to the yellow center of the peonies a little bit of brown, because I think this brown, as I did with the yellow, can create a connection between the center flowers, these peonies, and the outer filling flowers that are these sort of widths in brown and yellow color I've created. So what I'm trying to say is that when I create my main flowers, I always try, or at least in this composition, I try to create a sort of connection between these main blue flowers and the filling flowers that are framing them. Therefore, I'm using similar colors, so I'm using mainly brown and a little bit of yellow. With the same round brush in size 6, I create a few sort of berries in the brown stems, and I do this to enhance and give a little bit of touch, a bright touch to these brown stems. With this round brush in size 6, I keep adding some additional leaves where I think there are some white spaces, especially between the flowers. It is basically at this point that I look at the whole composition I've created so far and I add additional strokes where I think they are needed, for the leaves or for the petals of the flowers. Usually on the leaves, the brush strokes I add at this point are a little bit darker in color, and in this case, for example, I'm mixing a little bit of cobalt green dark with a little bit of blue, Prussian blue, and I created these light brush strokes all over the page to enhance a few darker leaves. I find it very valuable to add some darker brush strokes in your loose style floral composition, because I think these add some character to the composition and also some movement and expression. As I look at this whole composition, I decide to add a few brush strokes with my round brush in size 6, just to the center petals I've created in first place, because I want these to be slightly darker compared to all the other ones. Therefore, I add these few details with this round brush. To create these brush strokes, I'm using the same colors I've used to create the main flowers. So for the first flowers, I use cobalt blue, for the second some phthalo blue, and for the third flower, I use some Prussian blue. With the same brush and with a mixture of Mars Black and Burnt Umber, I just add additional small brush strokes on the brown filling flowers, and I do this to create some contrasting brush strokes in darker color. So there are many ways that an artist can pick colors to create their flower compositions. And I will create a whole video in the future where I will explain in particular what are the ways I use to decide which colors to put together in floral compositions. In the meanwhile, I hope that putting together blue and browns help you to imagine your floral compositions in a different way. If you like this video, let me know in the comments below and subscribe to this channel. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!